the Labour Party are in the pocket of unions. It seems like there is a coordinated media campaign about Labour taking money from unions, and it's framed as if it's corruption. GB News says this: Labour bigwigs accepted 480k from trade unions before capitulating to pay hikes. The Daily Mail, they say half of Labour MPs in pay of unions. Right-wing commentator Tim Montgomery says, "Show me corruption, please, Twitter," with a screenshot of an article that reads, "Cabinet ministers accepted hundreds of thousands in union donations before striking pay deals. Labour's top team have received 480k from their paymasters since 2019. Reform MP Richard Tice, who also shared that same article, said, "Thought Labour said they would clean up politics and be full of integrity, still in pockets of unions." Now, this story has spread across the press and also into broadcast media. Real life Alan Partridge, Richard Madeley said this.
There is a broad perception, not held by everybody, but certainly quite a large section of the press this morning, that what we're seeing here is payback, that the trade unions bankrolled over half of Labour MPs' campaigns in the last election, and this is now the back being scratched in return.
Helena, I mean, the Labour Party was created by unions. It's no secret union funding happens, but the media and right-wing politicians are acting as this, it's some kind of corruption, right? You heard Richard Madeley describing it as, well, you scratch my back, I scratch yours. What's the controversy here?
I mean, exactly. It's ridiculous. The idea that people didn't know before now that Labour were funded by the trade union movement is ridiculous. And of course, it is the cleanest money. It's the cleanest money in politics. It comes directly from workers in democratic organizations who get to choose where their funding goes. It is, in fact, essentially no different than people being paid members of a political party, which no one seems to really care about. Like, just because it happens to come through the vector of trade union funding and then democratically decided within those unions themselves, suddenly it's about the boss. This is why they say union boss, by the way. Don't want you to think that the people who lead trade unions, like people who are elected by members to be the democratic representatives who get to represent the democratic will of the internal membership, making the decision to therefore take some amount of funding and give it to the Labour Party to then be their voice in Parliament. That is not the same as a large individual donation from a big business person. Ironically, of course, that's who Labour get most of their money from now. They get more money from individual donations from people like billionaires and business people than they do from trade unions. But this is beside the point. This isn't dirty money. This isn't a revelation. And this is, of course, how they have been funded for generations. And on the top of this, what's even more silly is that one of the biggest pay deals that we even saw throughout this round of public sector pay deals was the deal that was struck between the Department of Health and Social Care and the junior doctors. The BMA aren't affiliated to the Labour Party. In fact, less than a third of the highest profile trade unions in this country are not affiliated, are affiliated, sorry, to the Labour Party. Two-thirds are not affiliated. So whilst they may be the trade unions' representation in government, they don't represent all the trade unions, let alone all the trade unions who have been reaching pay deals with the government. And thirdly, after all of this, they've clearly tried to distance themselves from the trade unions throughout their policy making process and how much they snubbed them during the National Policy Forum. Actually, in reality, this is about political expediency, regardless of the cost of the pay deals. It is cheaper to solve the pay deals, or would have been cheaper if we'd solved the pay deals 18 months ago, rather than dragging it out and indemnifying people like the train operating companies like the Conservative Party did. And the cost of actually striking a deal is way less than how much we've wasted fighting disputes. Of course, because this isn't about whether or not the government saves money or not. This is about disciplining organized labor and demonizing the concept of organized labor as somehow being political corruption, when really it is just democratic membership.
You make a good point there, because there is a sort of a skewering of what unions are by particularly right-wing politicians or pundits, which is that union boss or union baron. They love to say union baron because they want to
Yeah.
try and make it out like there's a false equivalence here. I mean, if you ask either of us, we'll say there's a difference between a political party accepting donations from the fossil fuel industry and then they enact the policies what the fossil fuel industry want, which is at the detriment of the planet and people. And then unions, which isn't one guy or one small group of people seeking profits. It is representation of the workers. And of course, there is corruption within unions that can happen. But you're right. It's the cleanest money you can possibly get in politics. But I find it very interesting that some media outlets weren't outraged by billionaire donors joining the Labour Party, because the problem with the Labour Party is not pro-worker enough. I mean, they've been taking billionaires on. They've been taking large sums of money. I mean, people like John Caldwell, Phones for You founder, he backs Labour, and he said it's because the Labour Party supports commercial capitalism. But there wasn't a whole media round attacking Labour for that. So, I mean, why do you think that is?
Well, of course, because the people who are in the media are also beholden to those same interests. At the end of the day, Comcast owns Sky News, the Barclay brothers own the Telegraph, or at least they do at a time of recording, and Rupert Murdoch owns places like The Sun and The Times. Like, the corporate interests are what is shared between the media and the political parties, like the Conservative Party always has been, and the Labour has become in a post-Starmer world, especially since that they actually share some material interest in terms of being supported by Rupert Murdoch, at least tangentially, during the election. So it's a real kind of turn face to see Murdoch press attacking Starmer over these kind of over this funding model that they previously had and have kind of moved away from in recent times. It's also really interesting the way they've lined up the attacks as well. What you've seen across the media throughout the times in which they have been doing pay deals with certain sectors is to try and pit the non-unionized workforce against the unionized workforce, saying things like, "Oh well, these people aren't getting pay rises because they're not members of unions yet. ASLEF and the BMA get to hold the country to ransom so that they get pay rises." I'm like, what you're doing there is telling everybody else that they should join a trade union.
Mm.
If you're angry that train drivers earn more than you and are striking to be able to get not just better pay but to retain their terms and conditions, it's really important you understand this as well. Is that the deal that was by you, I mean you all, not you specifically, Curtis, but the reason why the ASLEF was so militant in their strike action, the RMT as well, is that in the Conservative government's Department for Transport negotiations with train operating companies, the mediation of the train operating company dispute with the unions for transport workers was because they wanted to strip back terms and conditions. They wanted to change the Sunday working hours. They wanted to attack things like pensions and all of the extra benefits that they have for being unionized. Something that we took for granted 30 years ago, but has been stripped away by 45 years of neoliberalism. That's why your job at home sucks. That's why the gig economy sucks, is because we don't have broad trade union membership. So by the media trying to say, well, actually, the problem isn't bosses versus workers, bourgeois versus proletariat. The issue is the non-unionized versus the unionized, and the unionized are somehow getting a bigger slice of the pie than they should be determined to have been by the market. When, of course, if you have a problem because you don't get paid enough or your terms and conditions are shit, and unionized workers have better terms and conditions at better pay, just join a trade union. There's a reason why they have much better workers' rights in the Nordic countries where they have union density over 80%, and we have union density of 26%. Tiny, under 25s in this country, union density is 9%. Young people watching at home, go out and join a trade union. You need to do it. That's what protects your terms and conditions. You cannot beg your bosses for it. They will not give it to you. You have to organize.
And the thing is, they're so close to getting it, aren't they? Because it's like, I mean, we see a lot on Twitter and social media and GB News, which is that all these train drivers are earning 70K a year and they're still striking. And to pick up on what you said, first of all, a lot of trade union activity isn't necessarily about pay. It's about defending the rights they've won. It's about safety. It's about conditions, because pay is important, but also conditions, people's time. Like when you're forced to work at weekends, do you work for, normal pay, or do you get paid extra? These things are important to people. And they're so close to getting it, because the reason why some union workers are on really high pay is because they're in a union in the first place. Now, obviously, it's a load of bullshit, though, because they don't care about workers' rights. It's not that they're saying, well, we don't like union activity because it stops other people from getting to work. It's not fair on them. Okay, would you support them having more rights? Do you support them having a higher pay? And the answer usually is no. But you made some really good points there, and it's absolutely essential that people do join a union, because union density is embarrassingly low. I mean, obviously, through Thatcherism, through the 80s, it was decimated, and the countries that have kept their union activity are doing far better. Inequality is down, people's material conditions and the wages are far higher.
Patreon.com, Turn Left Media. Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you, Turn Left.